everyone! For my Animation Friday, at least the first one, I am going to be looking at Thumbelina, and by Thumbelina I mean the original work by Hans Christian Andersen, as well as the Don Bluth version that came out in the 90s. I believe 94, but I could be wrong. But anyway, both versions have fairly similar aspects to them, which I will get into, and very odd similar aspects to them, and some of them are different. I believe that as far as a story goes, they pretty much feel even-kiltered as to what goes on. Although I'll admit the Bluth version, there's a lot more inconsistencies than in the original work, meaning that things come up that really kind of don't make sense, and as I'm explaining the plot and sort of the characters, you'll kind of understand what I mean. So without further ado, let's start talking about the Hans Christian Andersen version and the Don Bluth version. So basically, both versions start out the same, except you do have this bird introing in Don Bluth, and you don't get that for Hans Christian Andersen's book. Although he does reference that a bird is really the person who ultimately tells the story of Thumbelina, which is at the end of the story. So you can tie in however you want. But I believe they're two different birds, though. Like the one in Hans Christian Andersen's tale is a swallow, but I don't think the bird that's in the Bluth version is a swallow. And the Bluth version's bird is a little bit more obnoxious and a little bit more dumb. But I will get to that as to why that is later on as I'm going through these two works for you. But basically it starts off the same, except for some reason they call in the Don Bluth version the fairy that gives the woman the seeds to grow Thumbelina. For some reason they call her a witch instead of a fairy. I don't know why, because literally when you see the drawing, you literally see that she has wings and everything. But I mean, I guess people were playing around with the idea of witches and fairies, because I remember that happening in Sleeping Beauty, where it was really a fairy who was bad, and yeah, I guess you could just call the fairy or witch whatever you want. But basically, it happens the same way, where she's given some seeds, she grows it in a pot, and then the flower comes, and then once she kisses the flower opens up, and a little girl's inside, who's apparently as big as a thumb, or slightly smaller, and that's why she gets her name. Thumbelina. Thumb. Oh, if your name is a pun, that must be sad. Like, if my parents named me after a pun, I would probably drive myself up the walls with it, but but that's how she got her name. And I don't really know if it's mentioned, though, in the Bluth version, whether or not that's how they originated her name, but in the Hans Christian Andersen version, it's definitely emphasized that that's where her name comes from. So, like the Bluth version, Thumbelina is pretty much the same character. Like, she's innocent, she's naive, she's fairly young, she can sing, which is also in both versions. And basically, this is where it sort of starts to drift off, is when Thumbelina gets captured. Now, she does get captured by the same person, the Toad's mom, who wants to ultimately have her marry her son, who's a toad. And yes, both these versions encourage bestiality. They do have some kind of Twilight going on in there. For some reason, I don't know why Christian Andersen suddenly thinks that he needs to put in all of his works like really deranged kind of love stories. I don't know why. Like, you know, he did it with The Little Mermaid, where she was a mermaid and the guy wasn't a mermaid or merman. He was a prince, a human. So, again, kind of strange and odd. but it occurs in the original work, so Don Bluth was trying to keep true to that source material. So basically, she gets captured for that reason, but also in the Bluth version, it's emphasized too that these toads are like entertainers of some kind, and they want her to be part of sort of that entertainment so they can make money. So there is that sort of emphasis too, and they emphasize it through a song, a really bad song actually. But basically, she gets captured in the original work, and there's no prince that shows up in the beginning. Let me emphasize that. In the Don Bluth version, the prince shows up, and they have some dialogue and some kind of development, but not really, because basically all they do is they make small talk and sing a song, and basically do a whole new world ripoff. And what I mean by that is he takes her on a bumblebee and rides her around and says, "Let me be your wings," and pretty much same kind of shtick as A Whole New World, and I feel like A Whole New World did it 10 times better. But basically, they have that little piece of development, but that's not presented in the original work. In the original work, she's just fine. She's just born out of a flower, and then she gets captured. And then basically, in the original work, this is where these two works drift even further, is how Thumbelina gets out of the situation that she's in when it comes to the toads. In the original work, she is on a lily pad, and since she can't swim, or I guess it's a lily, they say it's a leaf, but I'm assuming it's a lily pad, because lily pads are leaves, I guess. But basically, it's a leaf on the water. And this leaf is somehow attached somewhere in the ground to something. And has roots. And roots are part of the leaf somehow. And basically, in the original work, she's stuck on that leaf because they sort of make that as her prison, basically. Like, we'll just leave you on this leaf here. Good luck trying to get off it. But and they basically explain to her, like, yeah, I want you to marry off my son. And she clearly does not want to do that, but she's sort of stuck there. And she's crying, and she's all emotional, and she doesn't know what to do. And then these fishes hear her cry, and they feel bad for her, and so they find the root, and they gnaw on the root of the leaf, and then that sets the lily pad free, and she's off sailing. In the Don Bluth version, this is where I think there's a lot of just bad plot points from going to one end to the other. Because what happens in the Don Bluth version is basically the bird shows up and is like, "Oh, what's going on, Thumbelina? What are you doing here?" And for some reason, the toads leave. Like, they just leave her there for whatever reason. Like, they don't explain, like, yeah, good luck trying to get out. But I guess you could say that, again, it's the same thing, like the lily pad's sort of a prison for her, because, again, she can't swim, she can't do anything. She's basically stuck on that lily pad or leaf. And the bird comes, and basically, they take the lily pad and they go downstream. And then at one point there's a waterfall. Like little kind of waterfalls. I almost want to say it's like not like an actual waterfall, but it's like little dips going on there. And she starts to freak out and says, "I need help. I can't swim, can't do anything." And having a bird there, you think the bird would just be like, "Okay, I'll just put you on my shoulder, and then we'll fly away, and it'll be all good, and you'll be safe." But no, this bird happens to not know the purpose of his flight abilities, and he tries to pull the lily pad back away from where the waterfall is, and then all these other people have to end up helping out because the bird can't save Thumbelina on his own for whatever reason. It just baffles me, like, just because in the original work there is no waterfall, there is no danger, so it clearly established itself a lot better when it comes to going from one plot point to the next, instead of shoving in something that ultimately the story doesn't know how to solve properly. So there's that aspect that's present in the Don Bluth version. But basically they rescue her, and that's sort of the end of that plot point. However, in the original work, as she's floating down the lily pad, she basically gets caught by some cockchaffers. I guess they're like a kind of bird. And this is where they all think she's ugly. This is where like the ugly aspect comes in. And this comes into the Bluth version as well, but I'll explain that later. But basically, they capture, one of the cockchaffers captures her, basically just takes her off the lily pad, and then a lot of other cockchaffers say that, oh, she's ugly, and there you get that aspect that's thrown in there. In the Don Bluth version, once she's rescued from the lily pad, everyone's like, oh, you gonna marry the prince or whatever that you've seen for like 5 seconds or whatever. She's like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then in the Don Bluth version, she just kind of walks off into the next plot point, which involves a beetle. And the beetle has the hots for her now. And this wasn't in the original work. There's no beetle in the original work. So Don Bluth said, you know what would be better than having, just 2 animals go after her? Because there are 2 animals that go after her in the original work. Let's have 3. Just up the bestiality a bit. And so they have this beetle who's played by Gilbert Gottfried in Don Bluth's version, who has the gigantic hots for her. Even though ultimately all the other beetles think she's ugly for whatever reason. And then he does this like performance, and there's like all these other beetles, and then Thumbelina feels all discouraged, and then the bird comes in. And by the way, the bird's name's Giacomo. I don't even know if you would even remember the bird's name, because he's just that insignificant of a character. But basically, he comes in again and, helps her out and makes her feel better about herself. And there is this emphasis, too, in the Don Bluth version in regards to the seasons changing. Because they do emphasize that time goes by, and that Thumbelina is going through these things, through these seasons. As well as in the original work, where there is this emphasis of time going by. But basically, in the original work, in the original work, she eventually is in the season of winter, and winter is very difficult given the circumstances. So she ends up finding the field mouse, sort of similar to in the Don Bluth version, except in the Don Bluth version we're going from like the beetle plot point to the field mouse plot point. And in the original work it's from the cockchaffers plot point to the field mouse. And basically the field mouse character is pretty much the same in both versions. Like, all she serves as like a plot device for her to get to the mole. Okay, and this is the other one that is in the original work as well, where they want Thumbelina to marry. And basically the field mouse is providing this. And again, giving Thumbelina shelter in the meantime. And not only that, but they do show her a dead bird in the original work. But this dead bird she has no clue of. She's never met this dead bird before. In the Don Bluth version, it's the bird that's been completely useless throughout the entire story. Giacomo. That basically she ends up getting, or ends up seeing, because the mole shows them the bird in both versions. And in the original work, she heals it back to health, because it turns out that he actually isn't dead. And it does it does show in the original work that she does have this liking to nature, this ability to interact well with nature. In the Don Bluth version, I really didn't feel that at all. I mean, I did feel the changing of the seasons, but I didn't feel like they were trying to really emphasize the nature or the surroundings at all. And I think that's something that's really, really downgrades the film too. If you want to do something with animation, it's it's like doing Sleeping Beauty and not like fully showing the kind of animation that's possible with such a story. So again, completely missed opportunity by Don Bluth, but that's just my opinion, I guess. And basically, in both versions, she basically heals the birds to health. But unlike the Don Bluth version, in the original work, she has no clue who this bird is. Like, she's never seen this bird before, but she feels bad for it because she likes nature and she likes birds. And so, yeah, she just does it out of the kindness of her heart. And then, basically, the weird thing that the original work takes, in a similar way to what the Don Bluth version takes, is that once the bird is revived in the Don Bluth version, he just leaves. And she wants to go. Like, she legitimately wants to, like, just have him fly her home. And there is this emphasis, too, in the Don Bluth version that Thumbelina wants to go home. But there's never really an emphasis of that in the original work. Like, in the original work, she's just kind of, like, roaming around and exploring. And it's not really mentioned by her that, oh, I really want to go home and see my mom. No emphasis on that. So, you have that aspect that's sort of different. And for some reason in the original work, she's given a choice. Like, the swallow wakes up and he's like, hey, you want to go ride? Catch a ride? You need to go somewhere? And she's like, no, I'm going to stay. For whatever reason. And it really doesn't offer an explanation in the original work. So again, there are certain things that the characters do that I don't feel are that consistent. So in the original work, so there is that aspect. But in the Don Bluth version, he's just like, bye-bye. See you later. Thank you for healing me back to health, but goodbye. And basically, she's pretty much set up to marry the mole in both versions. In the Don Bluth version, she actually goes through the ceremony and the whole shtick. But in the original version, it doesn't seem to go to that point. It just seems to go to, like, the preparation of the wedding. And then the swallow comes back, and she's like, oh, yeah, please take me. I don't want to marry the mole here. So, basically, once the swallow takes her in the original work, he ends up showing her where the basically where the small people like her live. And once he shows her that, she sees that there are a lot of other, little ones that are like her. And then there's a king and a queen, sort of similar to in the Don Bluth version, but again, they are not shown until the way end of the film. And then they happen to have a prince, and this prince sees her and is like, hey, do you want to marry me? And she just says, yeah, no problem. I'll marry you. I'm okay with you, because you're actually my species. So basically, without even knowing the guy, she just says yes. And then this is where we get to the reference of the story. Because at the end, they have this reference where the bird is tweeting, and that somehow the tweeting and the singing gets to the writer, and then the writer ultimately writes the story, implying like Hans Christian Andersen got somehow some inspiration for the story through a bird. You could take that for what it's worth. In the Don Bluth version, as she's going through the wedding, she ultimately says no to the mole and says, forget this, I'm done. And then ultimately the bird does come back and does take her somewhere. I think he's supposed to take her to where the fairies are, or where because again, it is emphasized that these little people are fairies in both versions. And basically, Cornelius just shows up out of the blue, and it's like, hey, I'm here. Will you marry me? Yes, I will. There is a reference, like, to the mom, like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still part of this story. They get married. The end. Yes. So surprisingly, I was shocked as to how similar these two were, and that they kind of suffer similar problems into, like, sort of the consistency of the story and sort of the logic. But again, there's a lot of, again, this is sort of a fairy tale, hence the princess crown, and hence the fact that she is technically a princess in both versions. That there is a there are striking similarities. I just think that Bluth tried to make it into his own style at times, and that doesn't really work to his advantage because, again, this is his first attempt at a fairy tale, and I just don't think he can write them as well and execute them as well as the Disney films have done with fairy tales. And I think it just sort of shows, like, because there's so much inconsistency with what's going on that you're confused. I mean, it's not like that there's things that don't make sense. Like, yeah, you can have things that don't make sense. That's totally fine. But when there is such a point where even certain plot points don't make sense, then you have an issue. Even the original work does have this issue too. Like, we're never given an explanation as to why she didn't ride off with the bird in the first place. It might have been the fact that she may have not known that, hey, the mole is gonna, hey, the mole is gonna want to marry her. Maybe she didn't know that the first time, but still, it's kind of like there's no explanation given as to why she didn't decide to go with the swallow in order to get home. And there's really no emphasis within the original work of her trying to get home or wanting to get home, or it's like, did you have any connection with your mom at all? Like, bleh. At least with the Don Bluth version, he tries to put that in there, or at least shoehorn it, even though it's not really as well done. I mean, at least it's kind of there. But I think both versions just have their problems, and both versions are, I think, okay. I mean, I think the original work is a lot stronger because of how it's written, and it feels like the formatting of how it's structured is a lot more Disney-esque than Don Bluth's version, which goes completely funky, especially with that whole aspect of the beetle. Like, Don, why did you throw that in there? I almost wanted to say, why did you even bother with that? There was no point. She's already got two animals chasing after her. You don't need a third. No point. No significance whatsoever. You don't need to do it. Just don't. Even, especially when the source material doesn't even say or mention it. You could have totally taken something, and you could have taken, see, this is the thing too that kind of bothers me, is I feel like that this had a lot of potential of working off from the original work and updating it and just making it better. But Don Bluth decided, you know what, how about I just keep it to the same standard level, and even then make maybe even mediocre product. And I personally think that the original source material is stronger than the original work, even though she does not know the prince at the end, but he's sort of shoehorned in and tied in at the end. It's still more consistent into the story, and there's a lot more flow, and it doesn't feel like there's these awkward shifts when she's going from one plot point to the other, except for that one part where she doesn't go with the swallow initially, instead of having to wait again for him to come back and be like, yeah, I actually do want to go with you now. So ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about both versions. They do have their ups and downs. Again, Bluth's version does, again, have its sort of aspects that I guess you could call good, but overall I think they're both just kind of standard. I would just say that the original work holds more of a higher standard than the Don Bluth version. But I'll be sure to link my research below so you can check out the original work for yourself. If there are any questions, comments, concerns in regards to anything that I've mentioned, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until the next video, everybody.